2025 में जो पेपर 2 में जो क्वेश्चंस आए हैं हम उसको डिटेल एक्सप्लेनेशन के साथ डिस्कस कर रहे हैं। क्वेश्चन नंबर 2 में हम देखेंगे, क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 में जो पैसेज था वही पैसेज है क्वेश्चन नंबर 2 में भी। तो क्वेश्चन 2 में भी सेम पैसेज है, तो हम पैसेज को फिर से पढ़ लेते हैं ताकि हम क्वेश्चन को जो भी इसमें क्वेश्चन दिया गया है वो हम सॉल्व कर पाए। चलिए पढ़ते हैं क्वेश्चन पैसेज। Maintaining an ecosystem just to conserve biodiversity will affect its commercial potential as well as the livelihood dependent on the ecosystem. There is also a conflict between using an ecosystem only for livelihood, for commercial exploitation, or strictly for conservation. Deforestation caused due to the commercial exploitation will lead to indirect harm like floods, siltation problems, and microclimatic instability, apart from adversely affecting livelihood dependent on forest. These conflicts are particularly acute in the developing countries, where the dependence of people on the ecosystem is significant and commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income. तो क्वेश्चन क्या दिया गया है, पैसेज तो हमने पढ़ लिया। क्वेश्चन दिया गया है कि विथ रेफरेंस टू द अबव पैसेज द फॉलोइंग एजम्पशन हैव बीन मेड। फर्स्ट एजम्पशन है नो कंट्री नीड्स टू डिपेंड ऑन इकोसिस्टम टू बूस्ट नेशनल इनकम। दूसरा जो एजम्पशन है रिसोर्स रिच कंट्रीज नीड टू शेयर देयर रिसोर्सेज with those of scant resources so as to prevent the degradation of ecosystem. Which of the above assumptions are valid? So सही आंसर है both 1 and 2. एनालाइज करते हैं assumption from the passage on ecosystem and development. तो the provided passage discuss करता है complex relationship between maintaining ecosystem for conservation, using them for livelihood, exploitation them commercially to boost national income. ये हाईलाइट करता है कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जो अराइज होता है पर्टिकुलरली डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज में, जो भी डिपेंडेंस होते हैं इकोसिस्टम में, हाई और पोटेंशियल कमर्शियल एक्सप्लोइटेशन जो इंक्रीज करता है नेशनल इनकम सिग्निफिकेंटली। तो क्वेश्चन यहाँ पूछ रहा है इवेलुएट करने के लिए दो एजम्पशन। तो पैसेज ओवरव्यू करते हैं। पैसेज फोकस कर रहा है कॉन्फ्लिक्ट बिटवीन कंजर्वेशन, लाइवलीहुड एंड कमर्शियल एक्सप्लोइटेशन ऑफ द इकोसिस्टम। हाउ कंजर्वेशन कैन अफेक्ट कमर्शियल पोटेंशियल एंड लाइवलीहुड। Negative impact of commercial exploitation, deforestation leading to floods, siltation, climate instability, harming livelihood. These conflicts being acute in developing countries due to high dependence and the potential for exploitation to boost national income. तो इवेल्युएट करेंगे हम assumption 1 को। Statement 1 says, no country needs to depend on ecosystem to boost national income. The passage states that the commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income, and that this conflict is acute in developing countries where the dependence of people on the ecosystem is significant. This suggests that some countries, particularly developing ones, see potential in currently on ecosystem for boosting national income. However, the statement says no country needs to depend. The passage focuses on the situation in developing countries by highlighting that the conflict is particularly acute in these countries. The passage might implicitly suggest that the situation is different elsewhere, perhaps in countries with the diversified economies or other resources bases dependent on ecosystem for boosting national income is not a necessity. Therefore, the assumption that it is not a universal necessity for all countries, no country needs, could be seen as aligning with the passage specific focus on where the dependency is significant, and acute means implying it might be less or so elsewhere. Based on the interpretation which contrasts the situation in developing countries with the potential alternative elsewhere, statement 1 can be considered a valid assumption with the context of implied by the passage specific focus. Evaluating assumption 2, resource sharing to prevent degradation. Statement 2 says, resource rich countries need to share their resources with those of scant resources so as to prevent the degradation of ecosystem. The passage discusses the internal conflicts and pressure within countries, specifically developing countries, that leads to ecosystem degradation like deforestation when commercial exploitation is pursued for national income. It describes the problem but does not explicitly mention solution involving international cooperation. resources sharing between countries or differentiating between resource rich and scant resources countries. However, the passage emphasizes that the conflicts are particularly acute in developing countries due to their significant dependence and the potential for boosting national income through exploitation. The struggle of these countries is presented as a key aspect of the problem of ecosystem degradation. One possible interpretation aligning with the idea that the both assumptions are valid is that the passage, by detailing the intense pressure on ecosystem in developing countries driven by economic need, implicitly assumes that addressing this pressure might require external support or change in the global economic structure, such as resource or wealth sharing from more affluent nations, often resource rich in economic terms, if not always natural resources, to prevent degradation driven by necessity in resource scarce or economically struggling regions. This interpretation is not directly stated but could be inferred as a potential underlying perspective on how such global problems might need global solution. Therefore, interpreting the focus on developing countries struggle as highlighting a need for external assistance or redistribution of resources to alleviate the pressure on their ecosystem. Statement 2 can also be considered as a valid assumption, albeit one that requires reading between the lines based on the problem presented. So, conclusion on valid assumption. Based on the analysis what we have done, interpreting the passage focus on the specific challenge of developing countries as implying contrasting situation elsewhere for statement 1 and the need for external support to resolve these challenges for statement 2. Both assumptions can be considered valid within the framework of the question. So concept क्या है कि ecosystem conservation, description from passage, maintaining the natural state and biodiversity of an ecosystem. Conflict क्या है? Conflict with commercial potential and livelihood. Commercial exploitation जब हो रहा है तो using ecosystem resources for economic gain can boost national income but leads to deforestation, flood, siltation, etc., harming livelihood. Livelihood dependence अगर बात करें तो people rely directly on the ecosystem for their living. एडवर्सली अफेक्ट कर रहा है कमर्शियल एक्सप्लोटेशन को, ऑल्सो इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट विद स्ट्रिक्ट कंजर्वेशन. डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज की बात करें तो वेयर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स आर पर्टिकुलरली एक्यूट ड्यू टू सिग्निफिकेंट डिपेंडेंस एंड द नीड फॉर नेशनल इनकम बूस्ट. फेस इंटेंस प्रेशर बैलेंसिंग इकोनॉमिक नीड्स एंड इकोसिस्टम हेल्थ. एडिशनल इन्फॉर्मेशन की बात करें इकोसिस्टम मैनेजमेंट चैलेंज. मैनेजिंग इकोसिस्टम इन्वॉल्व्स बैलेंसिंग वेरियस कॉम्पिटिटिंग इंटरेस्ट. The passage highlights the core conflict between economic needs and environmental protection. This challenge is global, but often more pronounced in a region where poverty is high and alternative sources of income or resources are limited. Sustainable development aims to find ways to meet human needs without compromising the ability of ecosystems to provide service for future generations. This often involves finding alternative sustainable livelihood options for communities dependent on potentially damaging resource extraction, implementing sustainable forestry, agriculture, and fishing practices, developing economic models that value ecosystem services like clean air and water, climate regulation, alongside traditional economic output, promoting international cooperation and financial mechanisms to support conservation efforts in countries facing significant economic pressures. So, the passage underscores that decisions about how to use ecosystems have far reaching consequences, affecting not just the environment but also the economy and the well being of the people. So, we have seen the discussion of UPSC Csat previous year paper question number 2 of 2025. So here related to ecosystem we have seen one question in question number 1 and question number 2 related some assumption. I hope it is clear to you. So we'll discuss question number 3 in next video. So thank you for watching and please subscribe the channel and like and share. Thank you so much. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, Vande Mataram.